I said this is Promethean Action's weekly class for November 16th, 2024 with Ben Deniston. The title is How to Unleash Growth with the American System 2.0. And just speaking for myself briefly, this tremendous victory of President Trump and the American people, November 5th, requires that the same people who elected him and more stand closely by President Trump and his administration in accomplishing its revolutionary program for the American people. The Americans have to understand, support, and push through the economic program of President Trump to make America a manufacturing superpower. Americans have to understand and participate in this economic program if it's to be a success. And that's why we're doing this series of classes. Promethean Action has just published a new pamphlet of which Ben Deniston, whom you're about to hear, was a principal author. The pamphlet's entitled, What President Trump Can Do with the American System 2.0. And once Ben begins speaking, I'll put a link to the pamphlet in the chat so everybody can have it. I'll probably put it there again. So just let me pass it over to Ben. How to Unleash Growth with the American System 2.0, first class of a series. Go ahead.
All right, great. Thank you, Tony. Glad to be on with everybody today. Like Tony said, we're going to have a few classes here discussing this new pamphlet we put together as what President Trump can do with the American System 2.0. And what I've got today, get the slides going here for people. Just thinking about how to compose these classes, these discussions a little bit. And I think what I want to do is actually take the pamphlet in reverse order to some degree. I'm assuming that a lot of the people on this call or people watching on our Rumble or YouTube channel have some familiarity with the American system at this point. President Trump, gosh, I'm maybe a little fuzzy on the details. I think 2016, when he first ran, I think began to openly discuss and reference the American system, which I don't know when the last president or presidential candidate did that, certainly not in my lifetime. Was there any open recognition of the American system of economics? And since then, he's been, very vocal, especially recently. Now he's really latched on to the role of tariffs and how tariffs can be used to help ensure we rebuild advanced production, manufacturing, and rebuild a powerful, productive, healthy, functioning economy again. Having the role, the sovereign right as a nation, and implementing this capability to utilize tariffs to ensure that we can pursue those ends as a country. It's certainly a core American system policy that we've utilized. And Bob Ingram gave a very good class on this a couple weeks ago, discussing the history of tariff policies in detail. And, in the pamphlet, we also discuss credit policies, national banking, different variations of credit, and how credit financing can be used as part of a core American system policies. And I think we'll get back into some of those specific policies that can be used as part of the American system. But I wanted to start from a little bit of a broader perspective. And some of what we discuss in the concluding section of this pamphlet, and kind of take it backwards a little bit and get to what we mean specifically by American System 2.0, why we're calling it American System 2.0, and why we're introducing this now into the national discussion. So I wanted to open with this quote from Hamilton, which I really like. To me, I'm not a historical expert, so I'm not going to pretend I'm the master of all things American system and the history of it, how it evolved exactly, and who used what aspects of it. I'm very much a early student of history, and trying to, master this stuff to the degree I can quite rapidly. But conceptually, I think this gets at what I believe is kind of the core axiomatic basis of the American system. And, I think this is certainly reflected in a number of the American system proponents historically throughout the history of our country, this kind of outlook. But this is a quote from Hamilton, which we include in the pamphlet, from his report on a national bank from 1790. And he says, the intrinsic wealth of a nation is to be measured not by the abundance of precious metals contained in it, but by the quantity of the productions of its labor and industry. He goes on, the tendency of the national bank is to increase public and private credit. Industry is increased, commodities are multiplied, agriculture and manufacturers flourish, and herein consists the true wealth and prosperity of the state. So he's talking about what role a national bank plays in facilitating and providing the credit needed, ensuring that the credit is available and is accessible and can be utilized to ensure industry is increased, commodities are multiplied, agriculture and manufacturers develop and flourish, and so on. But I also really, kind of the core of tonight's discussion is going to be that first sentence in the quote. The intrinsic wealth of a nation is to be measured not by the abundance of precious metals contained in it, but by the quantity of the productions of its labor and industry. So what does that mean? So the wealth of your nation, the wealth we have as a country, he's saying it's not just found in obviously precious metals, could very clearly be referring to gold, silver, right? Which, often throughout history have been used as currency, have been used as a metric of value, right? But he's saying, and I would extend it again. I'm not trying to put words in Hamilton's mouth. I will just say from, my own understanding of physical economics and, my work studying under Mr. Lyndon LaRouche, it's not even the quote unquote resources you find in your nation, right? Raw materials, ores, iron, natural gas, oil, all those things have a value, but it's not the quantity of those resources or gold or silver is not the primary determining factor of value in an economy for a nation or wealth in a nation, right? He says we have to look to, as Hamilton says, we have to look to the productions of labor and industry, right? How much are we able to produce, right? How productive are we as a nation, right? And that, I believe, is the core axiomatic basis underlying the American system, and that is where we'll probably get into in a lot more detail in the next class, where Lyndon LaRouche's work comes in as a fundamental contribution and advancement to the American system beyond what other proponents of the American system had developed before. Where Mr. LaRouche's work, specifically in the science of physical economy, and again, I'm just kind of referencing, we'll get into what this stuff means a little bit more next week. In the science of physical economy, he really pursues in greater detail than I've seen anyone else develop anywhere, how to identify and measure real physical economic progress, what LaRouche would often refer to as increases in the productive powers of the labor force, right? What are the changes that allows your productive labor force to produce more of the goods needed to sustain society, higher quality goods, new dimensions of goods, utilizing new technologies, and so on. That's really the core fundamental source of real growth, real progress, real development. Right? And you could spend all day coming up with, very broad, kind of maybe overly simple but obvious examples. If you can have all the gold and silver you want on your land, but if you don't have tractors for agriculture, you're not going to be able to feed your population unless almost everybody's employed in agriculture. We'll discuss some of these types of things next week again. But today I wanted to focus on just even a little more fundamentally, what do we mean by progress? What does progress mean? And I think this is probably more important than most people realize. I think probably people involved with us with Promethean Action have a better sense of this than other people, but throughout our country more generally, I think this is actually probably a much more important question than people give credit to it for. It's the fundamental notions of what progress means for an economy, for mankind, I think are very much eroded, messed up, confused, or absent for a huge portion of our population. Some of that comes down to the fact we've had a post-industrial economy for decades now. We've been increasingly shifting away from production, any connection to actually creating value through actual development of new technologies, producing new goods, increasing the productive powers of labor. There's been a smaller and smaller and smaller percentage of our labor force, of our country, of our population has been involved in actual production, in actually creating the goods, creating what's physically needed to run society, to sustain society. We've had this crazy globalization system where we've increasingly been reliant on, what had very much been sources of cheap labor around the world to produce what we need. And, you have this crazy conception of a services economy where, the measuring by GDP and monetary metrics, you could claim their economy just shifted to a new mode where instead of generating money through actual production, we just traded services around. I do your laundry, you do my laundry. We trade money back and forth, and therefore that's value to the economy, right? I cook food for you, you deliver the food for me or whatever, and then somehow that's supposedly value to the economy, right? You measure it by GDP, money's exchanging hands, whatever, that shows up as value in kind of a standard economic sense. But as we'll get into, that is not real economic growth. And that's the reason why, despite all these claims that GDP has been going up for decades and the economy is getting better been getting better this whole time by those metrics, the actual physical reality of people's life experience, as people expressed very clearly in this last election, is not reflecting that reality, right? It takes more and more, it takes 2+ jobs to sustain the average household, right? The average income cannot get you a house these days, especially for younger generations, let alone cover the costs of higher education and all this stuff, right? The physical conditions of life have been getting more and more difficult, despite the fact that, I see this stuff on Twitter, on X, flying around now. You got all the people on the left like desperately trying to still prop up their Democratic side despite the utter embarrassing failure it's been. And I've seen an array of people now claiming that the economy is stronger than it's been ever, and we have Biden to thank for putting the economy into such a successful state. It's like you go by these monetarist standard economic metrics, they make all kinds of claims, but people don't buy it because they actually are living their lives. They know what it means to try and feed their family, to try and support their kids, to try and purchase a home. So anyway, just these are the things that people experience and they have an intuitive sense of. But what we're discussing here is trying to, tonight and in the successive classes, is get a deeper understanding of the actual reality behind that. They have a sense that they have an intuitive sense we have not been seeing real progress. We have not been seeing real growth, despite what the academics have been telling everybody. But then that begs the question, what is real growth? What is real progress? And, the other dimension to it that I think is even less recognized is the utter destruction of science over the past decades and even longer. And I think people, especially living through the whole COVID situation, a lot of people woke up to the fact that much of what gets presented as conclusive, authoritative, trust the science, conclusions of the scientific community is largely the product of political manipulations and control, not just a pure scientific exercise. So there's kind of been, I think, very healthy recognition of the corruption in the scientific institutions and what gets presented to the public as science. But there's even, deeper corruption that's been going on for much longer, really attacking the fundamental notion of mankind's place in the universe. And that's what we're going to get at today, is to really understand what it means for humanity, for mankind, for our nation as human beings, to create wealth, to create growth, to create a better future for our children and successive generations, fundamentally really requires a healthy, competent, truthful understanding of what is the nature of the universe we live in and what is mankind's relation to that universe. Right? Those maybe sound like very big and, maybe seemingly connections that people might assume are disconnected from politics today, but I would argue those are some of the most fundamental questions. And now is actually an incredibly important and ripe time to begin to introduce these questions and begin to uproot false fundamental notions that have become kind of an underlying axiomatic basis throughout society, unfortunately, when it comes to these questions of science and mankind's place in the universe. And you see this, probably the most extreme example is, from the radical environmentalists who, some will just openly advocate the idea that mankind is a virus on the planet, shouldn't be here. Everything we do is destructive, and mankind is some terrible force that's destroying nature. It's by the more radical and extreme of the environmentalist side, that's openly discussed and advocated. You have maybe a less explicit and blatant, but I think also equally evil view of the idea that, we live in a dying entropic universe in which all of our actions are ultimately meaningless. I think that's a longer standing corruption, oligarchical perspective that's been imposed upon science. So we can get into some of this, maybe in the Q&A a little bit more, but I wanted to present some work that I've been doing. This is work that goes back to, over 10 years now, back when I was working with Mr. LaRouche directly on part of his scientific research team and really delving into some of these fundamental questions about trying to, if you free yourself from these false notions and you just take a healthy, new perspective and assessment of what is the nature of the universe and what is the nature of mankind's place in the universe, we come up with a very different perspective. So I think probably a good place to start is look at, and we'll come back to this, look at the frontiers of technology, frontiers of development that we're really on the verge of. And I would highlight two very specific and I think interrelated frontier areas, which is space exploration and space colonization, which, if you ask me, Elon Musk pretty much single-handedly is put on the table for our generation now, for my generation and the younger generation. Something that we've known has been possible since the dawn of the space age. You know, people, you go back to the 1950s and 60s, you know, you had very brilliant people outlining and very clearly identifying what would be needed for mankind to begin the conquest of space, colonizing the moon, utilizing resources available in space on the moon, branching out to Mars, other planetary bodies. You know, the path has been there. But under the corruption and failed policies and terrible governments we've had really since the early 70s, we've just failed to pursue that. And Elon Musk has done an incredible service to humanity, and I think he recognizes that very explicitly. He openly discusses one of his missions in life is to try and ensure mankind becomes interplanetary, becomes a multiplanetary species, as, if anything, a basic security measure to ensure that human life continues on if some catastrophic event happens on one planetary body, i.e. Earth, that all of humanity and mankind is not wiped out. It's maybe a pessimistic way to view it, but not an unrealistic one. But you know what he's developed with now Starship. The Starship Super Heavy launch vehicle is an amazing step towards ensuring mankind can begin this long-awaited process of going out into the solar system. And then I would also highlight fusion energy, nuclear power, but in particular fusion power, as another revolutionary. So both these, as basically, I think probably most people are aware of, this would be essentially, you know, an unlimited source of energy for mankind. You know, depending on what fuel you use and what resources you have access to, you know, people can run the figures on how long will this fuel last or that fuel last. But for the conceivable future, you know, especially in the context of space exploration, you know, fusion power is, you know, satisfies all possible realistic energy requirements for a civilization that's advancing as rapidly as possible for many generations. So, and with space exploration, obviously you're opening up the potential for, you know, actually spreading mankind throughout the solar system, you know, developing entire new territories, opening up vast resource spaces, you know, in the asteroids, on the moon, and other places. We could actually be accessing resources throughout the solar system. So these are, I don't think we can understate enough how big of a historical revolutionary change these shifts represent for the future of mankind. So we'll come back to this as from I believe a higher perspective, looking at mankind's place in the universe. What do these breakthroughs actually mean? We can look at it from the lens of, like we just did, where we're currently at, what these things mean practically, pragmatically for us today, right? Essentially unlimited energy, vast new territories and resources, and the ability to spread civilization to completely untapped potentials throughout the solar system, right? But what do these things mean from the standpoint of mankind's fundamental relation to the universe? And what is the fact that we're able to pursue these technologies tell us about mankind's role in the universe and relation to the universe? So hold those questions in your mind. Hopefully those questions make some sense, because that's what we're trying to get at here today in this first class. So a lot of this work centers around attempts I've made to try and look at the processes of development of the universe from the standpoint of Lyndon LaRouche's work on what he would refer to often as energy flux density. He would often discuss it in terms of economies and technologies, and he would often talk about and show how technological progress, economic progress is always associated with higher concentrations, higher intensities, higher qualities of energy, focused and concentrated in smaller areas, higher densities. It's the technical meaning, energy flux density. What's the flow of energy? What's the density or concentration of the flow of energy through a process, right? The work I pursued kind of is looking at how you can expand that notion to economies in their totality, but also to other systems throughout the universe, to life, the development of life over time, to the development of stars and galaxies on the largest scales. And there's a lot of the figures here come from an interesting body of academic work by a Harvard professor, Eric Chiasson, who's pursued kind of a similar question and metric, but a very different philosophical standpoint than I've looked at it from. He's looked at it from specifically what he calls energy rate density. And I don't really want to get into all the technicalities. I just want to give credit where credit's due, but he's developed a similar metric, which, I'm leveraging a lot of this work here. But basically, the point of this is looking at, this gives us a universal way to look at all of these different systems across these vastly different time scales, vastly different size scales, and put them all in one perspective from the standpoint of one metric, right? So on the graph we're seeing here, if you had a chance to look at it, what do we have on this graph? We have a set of lines for stars and galaxies. And then we have a set of lines for life and the biosphere. This is over evolutionary time. So take like the last 500 million years of the evolution of life. And then we have mankind and physical economy, the development of human civilization and the development of physical economy. Vastly, very different systems, right? Galaxies are massive, right? Stars are massive. Galaxies are even more massive, right? The evolution of life runs on scales of millions and millions of years, whereas physical economy develops, in the course of thousands of years, if not generations, at the point we're at now. And yet, all of these systems can be measured by the rate of energy, the rate and density of energy consumption by those systems over time. And individually, each of those systems itself, progress, development, increasing complexity, increasing potential within each of those systems is always measured by an increase in the energy flux density of that system. So as individual stars go through their life cycle, and as they begin to become more complex, begin to produce more of the periodic table, which we'll get into a second, as they go through their life cycle and increase in their development, they have an increasing energy flux density. As galaxies develop from less organized to more highly organized galactic structures, that development is measured by increasing energy flux density in the galaxies. For life, in the evolution of life, you have, you could think in just the broadest terms, from the development, from the transition from the evolutionary stage or era of amphibian life to reptilian life, think of the age of the dinosaurs, to mammalian life, these major evolutionary transitions in the advancement, the development of life. is measured by increasing energy flux density. And with that comes more advanced forms of life, right? Mammals, being warm-blooded, have the ability to sustain higher, more developed brain functions. Some of this is measured by the increasing, what some people have measured as process of cephalization, where you have life vectored more towards increasing brain activity and concentration through the evolutionary process. And then you have the same with human society and human development, moving from, again, in just kind of the broader terminology, agricultural stage to industrial stage to technological stages of civilizations, in terms of how some people measure it and put it. That level of progress is very clearly measured by increasing energy flux density. So within each of these systems, and I would argue these are the systems responsible for the overall general complexity and advancement of the universe as a whole. Stars, galaxies, life shaping the biosphere. These are not just random arbitrary systems we're looking at. These are some of the most fundamental and critical systems that compose the nature of the universe, and especially in terms of its levels of complexity and potential. If you ask me, these are the most important systems in that context. And within each of them individually, again, progress is measured by energy flux density. And successively, from one set of systems to the next, from stars and galaxies to life in the biosphere to physical economy and mankind, each of those is in a process of stepward increase in energy flux density. Living systems, living organisms actually have a higher energy flux density than stars. Now, obviously not in terms of absolute energy consumption, right? A star is just mind-blowingly massive, right? If you have a sense of how large our sun is, it's incredible. But if you measure it, for example, per unit weight, per mass, per unit weight, the flux of energy consumption that a star uses, that our sun uses to sustain itself, is actually less than even an amphibian, the metabolic rate of an amphibian, a lower form of life in terms of energy flux density. Even the lowest forms of life are a higher rate of in terms of their metabolic requirements, which is the way to measure it in life, the energy consumption needed to sustain that living organism. Living systems are higher than stars, and human societies are even higher than any form of life. So you have this sense of, as I call it here in the chart, energy flux density as a universal metric of progress. Again, we can look at these vastly different systems, vastly different size scales, vastly different time scales, and we can actually look at it from the standpoint of one perspective, put it all together on one chart, which I find to be incredible, fascinating. And just to fill out each of these just a little bit, try and keep this relatively concise. There's a lot of details we could get into, and could certainly take up questions people have in some of the Q&A. But in terms of the galactic level and the stars, you have, in terms of their role in increasing complexity, increasing development, increasing the potential for future evolution, future development of the universe, I would highlight the role of stars in creating almost the entire periodic table. Right, so here we have the full periodic table of elements. Right, this is like all the elements that all of matter is composed of, right? Hydrogen, helium, carbon, iron, right? You have the periodic table of elements. This is the everything that the known universe is made up of, right? And all the ability to have, the diversity of life, the, different technologies we use, all of it depends on the different properties of different elements and being able to build different molecules and molecular structures with different combinations of different elements, right? These are, as the general term, the building blocks of the universe, right? Many of you probably are aware that the vast majority of these different elements, to everything we know currently, came from the development of, comes through the life cycles and the developments of stars. Again, by current best knowledge of cosmology, and cosmology is very much, if you ask me, a very unsettled area of science. I think highly speculative, probably, given how little we know about the universe currently. But just by current understandings, only 3 elements are believed to have been created before you had the first generations of stars existing. Everything else, all of the other elements of the periodic table, are created by the life cycles of stars. As stars go through as people know, stars are powered by fusion. Fusion is the combination of elements together, lighter elements. And then when you combine 2 lighter elements into a heavier element, you get energy released. So that's the energy process that sustains the stars, right? But through this process, all of, the Earth is, what's the Earth made of? It's made of all of these different elements, right? Silicon, iron, carbon, right? All of carbon-based life, all of those elements were created in the process of fusion of stars going through the life cycles, either through their basic life cycle or through the processes of explosion and nova at the end of their life cycles. This is the process of the creation of the entire periodic table. So why am I emphasizing this now? This is an example of these, as you have this stars going through the life cycle characterized by increasing energy flux density, the consequence of that activity, the product of that activity, the result of what stars are doing and what galactic systems are doing, is to increase the overall complexity and potential for further development in the universe as a whole, right? We have the process of going from just a few, literal few different elements, where the potential for different chemical combinations and molecular structures is incredibly limited with just a few elements, to the development of the entire periodic table, which creates the basis for then having planetary bodies, having the development of life, and so on, right? So you have, on the one hand, energy flux density is this universal metric, but the processes that are ongoing, that it's measuring, are processes of upward development, advancement, increase in complexity, increase in potential in the universe, right? And we see the same thing then in our next system with life. As living organisms evolve, again, here I just have highlighted examples of, just a simple first order perspective on this, the development from the age of amphibians to the age of reptiles to the age of mammals, comes with is characterized by increasing energy flux densities. And these, and I might not want to get into all the details in all of this, but life, these living organisms, these living species, through their activities are shaping, what we call the biosphere, the envelope, the environment surrounding the Earth, the atmospheres, the oceans. All of these systems are characterized by life, by the activity of life, and the ability of life to create what's measured in this study here, higher rates of thermodynamic disequilibrium. I'm trying to avoid some high technicalities just for this discussion. But that's just a way of measuring how powerful life is in its transformative effects, in its ability to create conditions for, again, further advancement, higher potential, higher development, right? Again, that's increasing over evolutionary time. So you have, as life gets more advanced, its energy flux density gets higher, its impact on the biosphere gets stronger. The biosphere becomes more organized, more structured, operates at a higher rate of disequilibrium, if you want to measure it that way, which has a higher potential to sustain more energetic, more advanced activity. So again, it's this process towards development, towards progress, right? Again, with energy flux density as the metric. And then in human society, we see the same thing. We see but with mankind, you have you begin to have the ability to, what we at this organization, love to talk about, the Promethean fire, right? With the development of living organisms, you're measuring their increasing energy flux density by their metabolism, by how much the bodies of the living systems themselves, their rate of energy consumption, the rate of energy utilization that's required to sustain those living organisms, right? When mankind emerges, we begin a process whereby we harness and control and utilize external sources of energy, fire, right? We begin to utilize fire millions of years ago with the initial emergence of, something you could begin to think of as something like human beings emerging. They is directly connected to the beginning utilization of fire, and fire is utilized to sustain, to keep you warm, to cook food. It's utilized in tool making. So very early on, from the very beginning, we begin to utilize fire to increase our ability, improve our ability to exist in the natural world, put it that way, right? So, and the entire process of development, from moving from those very initial, if you want to call them hunter-gatherer, whatever you want to, call it, the very initial formation of mankind, utilizing fire in the most basic sense, to agricultural societies, to industrial societies, to technological societies, we begin to use more and more advanced forms of fire, right? From basic burning of wood and other forms of biomass, to utilizing the higher energy density, more energy dense fuels like coal, oil, natural gas, and so on. And we create physical economies which sustain, our societies, which are completely interconnected and inseparable from the level of energy flux density of that society connected to those fuel sources, right? So again, you have this process of development measured by increasing energy flux density for human society. So just in this perspective here, we see mankind, human progress, the history of human progress and the prospective future of human progress as completely consistent and coherent with the natural development of the universe as we know it. And not just consistent and coherent with it, but the highest expression of it. in our literal universal metric here of energy flux density, human societies are the highest level of energy flux density of any of these developing systems, higher than the biosphere, higher than stellar and galactic systems, right? Not in absolute scale, obviously, like we talked about, but per unit mass, which is really the ideal way to measure this. Human societies are actually the most powerful forces in the universe. And what I think is fascinating is that if you look at it in these terms, you could kind of reshape how you even think about what the nature of human progress is. Because the entire development up to this point has largely been the successive utilization of different fuel sources that are intimately connected to life and the biosphere itself, right? The burning of wood and biomass, right? Those are products of the biosphere. Those are products of life, right? So societies dependent upon a wood burning level of energy flux density are, utilizing that resource of the biosphere and kind of expressing that, right? Then we move on to the next levels of fossil fuels, so-called, right? Like coal and oil and natural gas. We are no longer utilizing what I call products of the biosphere that are kind of made in real time. These are products of the biosphere that have been created over evolutionary time, over millions of years, right? The coal deposits, the oil deposits that we utilize to power society currently, these are the products of biospheric activity over hundreds of thousands, millions of years of biological activity has to occur to build up and generate these concentrations of fossil fuels. So the current mode of society, I think today I would think it's fairly accurate to say we're nearing the peak, nearing the pinnacle, at least take the United States as an example economy. We are nearing the peak, the pinnacle of a fossil fuel powered economy. So we are running off of, running off of the products of the biosphere, not just in real time, but over geological time, over evolutionary time. And that has created a level of development of mankind that actually can be measured in terms of evolutionary geological impact. So, this is a study I found really fascinating, which is that came out actually pretty recently, just last year, where they've shown that just over the last few thousand years, the human impact on the biosphere has actually doubled the energy flux density of the biosphere itself in just a few thousand years. That is an action, a characteristic that would take non-human life millions of years to generate. The biosphere itself has doubled in its energy flux density over time. It's not the first time it's happened, but this is the first time it's happened on the scale of just a few thousand years. And it's the product of mankind, human creativity, interacting with the biosphere through a fossil fuel level physical economy. So to me, it's, if you want to look at what is mankind's relation to the universe, I don't think that's like an abstract question. I think a new way to look at that is it's fundamentally related to and tied to our level of physical economic development, which gives us new insights into the nature of human creativity, what distinguishes us from the animals. That we have here concrete measurements, perspectives on how to better understand mankind's position in the universe and mankind's relation to the universe, which, you know, puts us to where we're going next, which is into space, the development of the solar system, and nuclear power. This is a massive transition where if you think about a nuclear powered economy, we're no longer looking at mankind needing to sustain itself with fossil fuels. You know, obviously we'll use them for a while, but you're beginning a process whereby we're not interacting with the process of the biosphere over evolutionary time. We're looking at the beginning of the process of mankind interacting with the process of stars over stellar time and galactic time. And as we see currently, the negentropic impact, the measure of mankind's power, scale, meaning in the universe, we can measure directly in terms of evolutionary activity, evolutionary time. We're just beginning an age whereby we can measure that instead by stellar activity, by stellar time. Right? We are looking at, so I think the profundity of space exploration, of fusion power, of developing a physical economy that is fundamentally powered by the nuclear power, which is the product of stars, stellar life cycles over many generations of stars, represents mankind interacting with the universe in an even more fundamental and more powerful way. So when we say, you know, what is economic value, what is progress, I think it's critical we attempt to bring those levels to higher, more fundamental conceptions than exist really much in society today. You know, it's not just about you know, using up the resources we have and, you know, opening up new oil deposits, opening up new gas deposits, opening up new uranium deposits. Sure, we can do all that. Yeah, we can develop new resources. We can utilize these things, but the very nature of human progress, human development is a much more profound, much more fundamental question about mankind as the highest expression of creativity and development in an inherently creative and developing universe. And I know for many of our followers out there, many of our fellow citizens and people we're working with, these are going to be very challenging conceptions. But we have an incredible opportunity to not just, you know, create some good policies for the next few years, but we can fundamentally create a renaissance in people's understanding and appreciation of mankind's place in the universe. So, you know, I think we have a unique role to bring it to that highest level. So yeah, that's a lot to, you know, I tried to cover a lot. Hopefully I avoided too much detail on some of this stuff, didn't get too much in the weeds, but, you know, I think that is the proper way to really situate what we mean by the American System 2.0, and measuring what are the ways in which we can most rapidly advance the development of the economy by understanding mankind's relation to the universe in this new and more fundamental way. Anyway, that's a lot. Hopefully it provokes some questions and we can have some fun discussion there.
Terrific. Thanks so much. It was quite unique.